So welcome everyone to Concurrent session 98 at our IAEE online conference, which is going to be on green gas. And thank you all for coming. And I'm hoping we're going to have 3 papers, but we'll definitely have 2 because two of the authors are definitely here. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Anica Mertins, who's going to talk about her paper on exploiting potential for economies of scale in biogas purification infrastructure. So Anica, over to you, and I invite everybody who's here to put comments on the chat, and Anica is going to speak for about 20 minutes. I'll give you a warning if you're getting close, then we'll take questions immediately after your presentation on your presentation. Okay, Anica, do share your screen.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen now and hear me well. Great. Okay. Yeah, I'm Anica Mertins and I work at the University of Applied Science in Osnabrück. And as already mentioned, today I would like to present my research in the field of green gases to you. And the title of my research is Exploiting Potential for Economies of Scale in Biogas Purification Infrastructure. And for those who are not familiar with the German regulations in this field, I would like to start with the framework conditions. There are currently just under 9,000 biogas plants in Germany. The most widely used business model in this is the combined on-site generation of electricity and heat. As we can see in the figure on the right, this business model is implemented by about 98% of the biogas plant operators. And now new framework conditions through changes in the regulation, for example, the Renewable Energy Sources Act, and the coupling of sectors might lead to an inversion of this relationship. And in the biogas sector, new business models will be needed in the next few years to ensure that the continued economic operation of the plants is ensured and to take advantage of the new opportunities. And one possible business model is the purification of biogas to biomethane and then the injection to the existing natural gas grid. Yeah, I've studied this business model as part of my research and I would like to present it to you. It has various advantages which I would like to discuss in more detail in the next slides. Yeah, and as I already said, the main goal of research in the field of upgrading biogas to biomethane is to find new economic business models. And these have to be viable even without a subsidy. The advantage of biomethane is basically that the usage of biomethane is more flexible and efficient compared to unpurified biogas. It is a sensible alternative, particularly if the heat that is generated by the CHP plant on the site of the biogas plants cannot be fully used in the surrounding areas. Yeah, and furthermore, greenhouse gas emissions can be saved by replacing fossil fuels by biogenic fuels. And and in addition to that, there are indirect effects, for example, through the increased recycling of manure. The greenhouse gas emissions from storage are avoided and the need for fertilizers is reduced by the usage of manure. Another advantage of biomethane is that the usage of biomethane is very diverse. And here I have 3 examples for you how to use it. For example, it can be used off-site for combined power and heat generation at a place where the heat can be used sensibly. And furthermore, biogenic methane can also replace fuel in the mobility sector, or it can replace natural gas for the heat supply. And one more main advantage of upgrading biogas to biomethane is the possibility of using an existing infrastructure. like in regions with an existing natural gas grid, the system can be used for the injection and distribution of biomethane. Yeah, and then there are other relevant framework conditions for our research in the field of costs and investment costs. So there's a high regression in investment costs for purification plants. As we can see in the figure on the right, the specific investment costs for upgrading plants decrease significantly with increasing amounts of upgraded biogas. Thus, the larger the plant, the lower the cost per standard cubic meter of biogas for purification. And in addition, the smallest upgrading plants considered as economically viable with a capacity of about 250 standard cubic meters are larger than the average biogas plant, which produces about 180 standard cubic meters of biogas in an hour. So now I would like to present our approach of modeling. The idea of modeling was to create a purification and distribution infrastructure for biomethane in a selected region. During the upgrading of biogas to biomethane, different impurities have to be separated. And the relevant steps are, for example, the desulfurization and the dewatering of the biogas. In addition, carbon dioxide is removed to increase energy density and to achieve the natural gas quality. The carbon dioxide can be sold, which can contribute to the economics of the biogas upgrading, but this business model is not explored further in my work. Yeah, the idea of modeling is basically to make the best utilization of the different framework conditions. So the cooperation is intended to exploit the cost regression and the investment costs. The advantage here is the larger amount of biogas, which should lead to lower specific investment costs of purification. Thus, a cooperative approach for upgrading biogas to biomethane is pursued in order to exploit the cost regression of the upgrading infrastructure. The goal is to reduce the system costs through cooperations. For the system costs, the cost for the upgrading plant, which consists of investment costs and annual expenditure, and the investment costs for the gas pipelines are considered. And the aim of the modeling now is to minimize the system costs. And our research hypothesis is in the bottom of my slide. It said that the construction of a joint purification plant, including biogas pipelines, is economically advantageous compared to individual on-site purification infrastructure. So the modeling is based on the known biogas process, which we can see on the left of my slide. In this process, biogas is produced by various feedstock, such as corn, straw, waste materials, or manure. And this happens at decentralized locations in digesters. The biogas there has a methane concentration of about 54%. And our modeling does not change this existing process. It starts with the transport of biogas afterwards. So the biogas is transported via biogas pipelines to a central upgrading plant. The upgrading plant has a limited capacity, which mainly depends on the amount of biogas that is produced at the decentral biogas plants. The result of the purification is a green gas with a methane concentration of more than 95%. It is transported through the existing natural gas grid, also via another gas pipeline, and then injected into the grid. Thus, it can be distributed and used elsewhere for different fields of utilization. And normally, biomethane is fed into a medium or high pressure gas grid because year-round usage can only be guaranteed in those pressure levels. Yeah, I'd like to explain a little more how the modeling works. It is important to know that we use the existing biogas plants and the existing natural gas grid. So no biogas plants are, for example, added or changed. And these existing components are read into the model and placed in the region of consideration, like, for example, this region. Now, the idea is that the biogas plants are combined for a cooperative approach. For this, the biogas plants are grouped in clusters. In this example, we have 3 clusters, as we can see. We use the k-means algorithm to form the clusters. And for each cluster, one upgrading plant is implemented. We can see that the biogas plants are connected to the upgrading plant through pipelines. The purification plants are also connected to the gas grid via pipelines. And to achieve the optimal result, the system costs of the different numbers of clusters are compared, and the optimal number of clusters is selected. Like in our example, we would maybe look at 2, 4, or 5 clusters and compare the system costs of the different approaches to find the best solution. Yeah, and the modeling solution includes the gas pipelines and the purification plants for the clusters. So the model provides information, for example, on the upgrading plants, the location and the capacity, and information on the length of the gas pipeline and the location where the gas is fed into the gas grid. So for our modeling, we used a case study, which is the administrative district of Osnabrück County. As we can see in the map, it is located in the north of Germany. And in our case study, we have 1990 biogas plants with an average plant size of 560 kilowatts electric. This corresponds to about 150 standard cubic meters of raw biogas per hour. And at the moment, there's no existing biogas purification in the region. So let's take a look at my results. To get an idea of the benefits of cooperation, we first looked at the cost of an individual purification, which means a purification plant for each existing biogas plant. And also including the connection to the gas grid. And the annual system costs for this approach are about 40 million euros. The main problem here is that even the smallest purification plants are significantly over-dimensionized for many existing biogas plants. So that's why we looked at the joint approach. And in contrast to the first results, the model calculated the cost for joint operation with annual system costs of about 23 million euros. So this is a cost reduction of about 43%. So we can see the cooperative approach delivers a significant advantage compared to the first individual approach. And in the figure on the right, we can see that the optimal solution calculated by the model consists of 14 clusters, and each cluster can combine 3 to 12 biogas plants for cooperative upgrading. So we see some clusters are with only 3 biogas plants, some have a lot more. And the cost regression of the purification plant in this case is optimally exploited. So and in this graph on the right, we can see the cost components that are represented in my research. The system costs consist of pipeline costs and upgrading costs, as we can see. The amount of the cost components are plotted on the y-axis, and those depend on the number of clusters that we can see on the x-axis. We can see in the graph why 14 clusters lead to the minimum system cost. Because this number combines the advantages of mainly two effects. The costs for the purification plants decrease significantly with the smaller number of clusters due to the cost digression in the investment costs. And on the other hand, the costs for the construction of the gas pipelines decrease with an increasing number of clusters, since shorter distances have to be covered. And basically, the spatial proximity of biogas plants is used to exploit the cost regression through cooperation and to be able to make optimal use of the size of the purification plants. You can see there are some minor up and downwards, especially in the graph of costs for the upgrading infrastructure. I want to explain those in the next slide. So, as I said, normally we would expect that fewer clusters would lead to lower costs for purification plants by taking advantage of the cost regression. But in some cases, one cluster less can result in the same or even higher costs for the purification, even though one purification plant less is needed. And this can result from the fact that the installed capacity of the purification plants can partly be better utilized with more clusters and an optimal cluster composition. And here's an example shown in my figure. On the left side, we can see 3 clusters. Each can optimally utilize the capacity of the purification plants that is installed. And on the other hand, on the right side, we can see that there's one cluster less that is used, but in this case, 2 purification plants with a larger capacity have to be built, which means that we have higher costs in the investments. So, however, this capacity cannot be well utilized in the solution on the right. So the upgrading plants are oversized and lead to higher costs compared to the first solution. So now some details of the modeling. The presented modeling involves an NP-hard optimization problem because all 2-level capacitated facility problems are NP-hard. This means that no optimal result can be found by a mathematical optimization. And because of this, we used an approximation with 2 possible locations for the placement of the purification plants. So the 2 options can be seen in the figure on the right. The first option is to place the purification plant at the center of the cluster, which can be seen in the left. And the second option is to place the plant next to the biogas plant closest to the gas grid. And now for every cluster in our model, the modeling chooses the option which leads to lower costs. And the aim of these 2 options was to further reduce the pipeline costs. And our result shows that in 2/3 of the clusters, the upgrading plant is placed at the center of the cluster. In reality, the purification plant would probably be built rather close to a biogas plant because it is not clear whether there would be space for a purification plant in the center of the cluster and whether the accessibility is ensured. So let's come to the conclusion of my findings. I would say the biggest advantage from the result is that the cost reduction of almost 50% using joint purification. It can be said that a cooperative approach to upgrading biogas to biomethane brings a significant cost advantage. And in the future, the upgrading of biogas to biomethane through cooperative approaches may therefore also represent an interesting business model even for smaller biogas plants. And in general, we can say that the economics of biogas upgrading depend on the one hand on the availability of gas infrastructure in the surrounding area, and of course on the possibilities of a cooperative approach, if there are biogas plants in the surrounding area or not. Yeah, another major advantage of our work is that the modeling is verified with real data from our case study. And like this, it is highly relevant for the future infrastructure development. And furthermore, a flexible adaptation to other regions is possible based on the modeling that I presented. Yeah, and the next steps for successful implementation of this solution would be to examine the economics in detail, since only the minimization of the costs is carried out in our modeling. No statement about an economic viability can be made based on our results. And also it should be noted that the feasibility depends on various framework conditions. For example, the exemptions of the biogas plant operators if they want to operate in a cooperative business model or not. Yeah, and now I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Anica, and thank you for a very clear presentation. Can I invite anybody who's got a simply unmute themselves and ask their question? Well, yeah. Carsten, go on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Anica, for the interesting presentation. It shows us the power of cooperation. You said that you haven't done the calculation of on economic viability yet, but do you have a range for the cost the biogas plants in the cluster would incur for upgrading and transporting the biomethane to the main grid? Any rough estimations? Because that is, in fact, the decisive figure for the operators. Even if the relative costs are better for the cooperative solution, they might just be too high to be able to be successful in the market.
Yeah, I think in the biogas market, the biggest problem that it depends on different conditions. For example, in the beginning, which feedstock do the operators use? Yeah. And on this also depends like what business model we can choose. For example, now we can see that in the market, the business model to sell it in the mobility sector is very interesting if you use manure as a feedstock, because but the truth is I don't really have numbers that are reliable, like on how much money you can earn with biomass. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. But you're going to get the cost data, right, from the plant operator. So that's, and then you'll be able to calculate them. Well, the market for biomethane is pretty bad at the moment, I'm afraid, in Germany, and some plants even had to drastically reduce their capacity, the capacity utilization to cut losses. But as you said, I think mobility is a promising future segment. Well, if you are based on waste.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we see also the possibilities in LNG in the future that we liquefy the biomethane. But yeah, I think the market will develop in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know.
Yeah. And have you discussed your idea with the plant operators? Because I imagine managing a network of 12 farmers is quite a task, isn't it?
Yeah. There were like many questions about how it will work and the different methane concentrations of the biogas, and there are some discussion points, I guess, where they have to find a solution. And I think at the moment it's really hard to find operators that are interested in this point, but it gets more like they see that the Renewable Energy Sources Act will expire in some years, and they are searching for those solutions. And I think at the moment, the best solution would be to find an operator for the upgrading plant in the middle that, yeah, not one of the operators builds it and uses it, so that we have a neutral person in the middle that can, yeah, communicate with all of them. And I think that would be the solution to work with that.
Okay, and what were the main concerns? What concerns did the farmers mainly voice when you discussed with them?
I think that yeah, the problem is what happens when it's really good, like who has the best earnings, or what happens when it works bad, and like how do we find solutions for those problems? I think that were the main like concerns, because now they work, yeah, on their own on their farm and doesn't have to like find solutions for those problems. And I think that's the biggest concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you exclude any biogas plants that have a high utilization of their heat, or did you include everything?
No. The truth is no. It would be a next step to look into the biogas plants and find biogas plants that, yeah, like some have good business models for their CHPs, and yeah, it doesn't make sense to change the business model there. But there are many biogas plants, especially the old ones, that don't have the good heat usage, and where we can, yeah, change the business model.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions.
Sure.
Great. I mean, I'll ask you a couple of questions. I suppose one obvious question is there anticipated future supply of biogas which would make your clustering more viable? So clearly, yeah, there's the existing amount of biogas, but obviously if you scale that up, then the clustering becomes easier, the economics all improves. I suppose is one, and how future-proof is your current clustering, I think is a key question. And the other question is, well, what is the basic, you hadn't done the sort of basic economics of this, so forget about all the subsidy. Does this actually really make sense? Okay, because you're upgrading something, the maximum value of this upgrade is only ever going to be, 100% of the value of the gas, okay? Because you're only going from 54% to 90%. It's better just to consume it directly at point of creation, if possible. Is it ever good? And you need to also work out what the overall carbon cycle is. It doesn't feel like a bit, something that's really going to fly if you take all the subsidy away, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Why wouldn't you just use it directly at the farm or in small scale local use? Why would you ever think of upgrading it as a sort of long-term market driven solution? Okay. So there's two questions there.
Okay, I will just start with the second one. And yeah, the problem is that the biogas plants are, yeah, most times like far away from cities, from houses where you can really use the heat that is generated. And we can see that it is only really economical viable to have, yeah, on-site CHPs when there is a heat that can be used in the surrounding area. So we have many biogas plants where we can't really use the heat, or just use it for, I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, that's the idea, because we can't really use it where we make the biogas in the decentralized places. And yeah, the advantage, or maybe the idea from the energy system, is to replace the fossil fuels with biomethane. So we have methane that we use in households and yeah, in mobility, for example. And when we can replace it with biogenic methane, we have less greenhouse gas emissions. It is better for the climate change. And yeah, that's the idea from the energy system to replace fossil fuels.
And maybe I can add one thing. I mean, most of the biogas plants that produce electricity on site with the biogas receive quite generous feed-in tariffs at the moment, sometimes well above 20 cents per kilowatt hour. This will go away. So after 20 years, this scheme expires, and then they have to apply. They have to participate in the tender system, and that grants only something of the size of 15 or 16 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a significant reduction, and many of them will just not be able to survive on this. So for them, there's maybe no alternative. Either they move to upgrading and into the market, or they close down the plant because there's no heat sink in the vicinity. And from the systemic perspective, we dearly need a renewable methane in the heating sector. So the renovation rate there is rather low, and we need to decarbonize the heating sector. And I think biomethane is one option there. Whereas electricity, we have many other options that are cheaper and have a lower CO2 footprint than biogas.
But I don't think you said what's the potential supply of if you upgrade all this biomass to biomethane, what percentage of total methane use in Germany would this be?
Well, if you take all biogas plants, I'm not sure. So at the moment we produce around, I think, Anica, 10 terawatt hours of biomethane, and that's about 2%, 1 or 2% of total natural gas supply in Germany. Yeah. So, well, I mean, biomethane plants will never be able to replace all natural gas. But then we have PTG and power gas coming up, so that can help.
And what about the future proofing? I mean, okay, it's 2% at the moment, but could it be 4%, 6%, or no, 2% is your limit? So
no.
Yeah, I don't think it will get like too much more, because they don't build biogas plants anymore, so it's not an interesting business model at the moment. So I think, like, under the current framework, it won't get more.
And there's a pretty strong consensus in Germany that we shouldn't use more energy crops to build more biogas plants. There has been a fierce debate in the last years, and biogas is clearly the least popular renewable source. So I totally agree with Anica. I don't see the potential of many more biogas plants being built. It's rather helping the existing population, which is rather large. We're talking about 10,000 plants in Germany, to help the existing population to survive, I think.
Okay. I've just been involved in a sector coupling study where biomethane is one of the solutions to the European net zero problem. So where is all this biomethane going to come from is a big question at the European level. So wouldn't write it off entirely as being unimportant that you could increase this.
And other countries don't want to use any energy crops. So France is very firm on this point, and still they're planning for very ambitious growth. So I asked the question, I think 2 days ago, to one of the presenters, and he said, well, yeah, we have enough waste to do this. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the truth is we try to calculate if we can use all the waste in our region and have the same amount of energy from our biogas plants, and this doesn't work. Like, it's not enough. It's like 80 to 90% that we have in energy as a result, but we don't have enough, even if we use all the waste that we have. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Anica. I think Hussein has left, so we'll unless he's still there. We'll leave his question. So Carsten, are you ready to present?
Or do we have time for another question? I'm not sure. Maybe we can wait till the end, because I would have another question.
Okay, Bennett, well,
I'm happy to wait.
Yeah, go on. We're going to get out. We haven't got our third presentation.
Okay, so we have some time.
So Benedikt, go ahead.
Because it sticks right to what we just talked about. Because I would like to know why you decided to choose this specific region. I can only assume that you do have a very high density of biogas plants there, and maybe also looking a little bit beyond that, are there other potential regions where you could roll out your modeling approach? Because it would be quite interesting to see if there are other regions in Germany having maybe a very high density of biogas plants that could benefit from this joint biogas upgrading.
Yeah, well, the first question why we use this this case study is because it's part of a project where we are searching for new business models for biogas plants in the administrative district of Osnabrück County, and yeah, the policy is trying to find new solutions. We really want to have those biogas plants in the energy system of the future. But yes, we have a lot of biogas plants, like 90 biogas plants is a lot for one administrative district. And yes, our goal was to have a modeling that we can use in other regions in Germany. We used basically data that is available for everyone, so we can easily use the biogas plants from another region and have the same findings, the same results for another region. So
you're ready to roll out across Germany?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and thank you, Anica. So Carsten, over to you. I won't try and pronounce your university's name, but perhaps you can for me.
No, our university's name is a major obstacle in our internationalization efforts. So when one of my colleagues went to the United States once, and she said, we are from the Hochschule für Wirtschaft and so on, and then she was introduced as being Iris from the University of Witchcraft by the US colleagues. Well, anyway, can you see my screen? I've shared it. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah. So now let's move from the supply side to the demand side. And the demand side is really a concern for biogas and biomethane producers at the moment, at least in Germany. So we looked at pricing, marketing strategies in 4 countries in Europe, the UK, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And we asked ourselves a question: is the pricing strategy of providers in line with consumer preferences? Because that is what you would expect from a rational marketeer. So I'll briefly introduce the role of biomethane in the energy sector. Well, Anica, I think, has laid the groundwork for that, so there's not too much I need to say. Then I'll move on to our hypothesis and methods before presenting our results and going into the discussion and conclusion. So as Anica has pointed out, there are various ways of using biomethane. One of them is heating buildings. I just like to add that in the future, we will probably see not only biomethane based on biogas, but we will also see power to gas coming into this sector. The first power to gas plants are already being built and are already being used, at least in Germany. If we look at Europe, at other European countries, we see that the foci of utilization of biomethane are very different. So in Sweden, for instance, most biomethane goes into the fuel sector, transportation sector, while in Germany, the vast majority of biogas plants and biogas upgrading plants sells biomethane into electricity production. So it's used in CHP units, and that is because this electricity is heavily subsidized. Now, why is biomethane so important? And I think this chart can give us a hint. We are often talking about the energy transition and Germany is proud of their energy transition, but in my view, it's really an electricity transition than an energy transition, because both transport and heating and cooling are lagging behind. So in heating and cooling, only about 15% comes from renewable resources. Europe, on average, is slightly better with about 21%. But there's a far cry from the numbers that we see in the electricity sector. And with the renovation cycle being so slow in houses and heating system, and many houses many homes are being heated with natural gas in Germany, in France, in the UK, I think there's a tremendous potential for biomethane. So we have a number of biomethane plants in the European Union. The majority of them is located in Germany and the UK and Sweden. But as Anica already said, there are almost no new plants built in Germany. So Germany is stagnating, but we see a very dynamic development in other countries, France, for instance, with very ambitious growth targets. So this biomethane can be sourced by households. So we have two examples here, one from Germany, one from the UK. In the UK example, I think it's 15% of the gas product coming from biomethane. The rest is natural gas, which is compensated. And the German example, there are various contents of biomethane, as we will see in a minute. So you can buy it, and biomethane upgrading plants can sell it to private households. But in order to make this a success, the providers have to get the marketing strategies right. And two important elements of that marketing strategy are product strategy and pricing strategy. So how do the providers price their products? There's actually only one study, which you find on the lower right here, that we did a couple of years ago, but only on a national scale, looking at German providers, which showed that apart from the biomethane content, there was no relation whatsoever to the product attributes. But we can look a little wider, we can look a little further apart and draw on the research that is out there on the preferences of consumers for biomethane, that has shown that the consumers like a higher biomethane content in the product. They like biomethane from waste rather than from energy crops. They want eco-labeled, and there's one recent study from South Korea about the willingness to pay in general for replacing natural gas by biomethane. Looking still a bit further apart, we could look at the preferences for renewable electricity, and those are in line with the findings of biomethane. So it's a high renewable content, it's regionality or local production, eco-labels, which consumers want. On the other hand side, we have a research stream on the discourse on biogas, especially in Germany, which has shown the negative views, especially on energy crops. So building on this research, we can identify 5 factors that we think influence the willingness to pay for a biomethane product, and that's the high biomethane content. That's an attribute which relates to the production side, so local regional production, and if the biomethane is produced from waste and not from energy crops. There are 2 more criteria, 2 more attributes, that's labels and additional eco benefits, which I won't present for time reasons. So these are our hypotheses, and the basic idea is that providers' pricing strategies should take consumers' preferences into account. So any rational marketeer would look at consumer preferences and try to exploit the willingness to pay for pro-environmental attribute levels. So the first hypothesis is the attribute biomethane content is positively related to the price. So the higher the percentage biomethane in the product, the higher the price. The second hypothesis is the attribute level regional is positively linked to the price. And the third hypothesis is the attribute level from waste rather than from energy crops is positively linked to the price. So those were the three attributes. A few words on sampling and data collection. We did a full evaluation. In Germany, we looked at 127 tariffs. So we have comparison portals, we have our own previous research to identify the companies. In Austria, we identified 25 tariffs based on information from the regulatory authority and the comparison portal. And in Switzerland, rather small country, but a big biomethane market with nearly 190 tariffs, where we drew on information from the Swiss gas industry. In the UK, we identified 24 tariffs. So we collected the data between July 2018 and June 2019. And there's one thing that's a bit tricky. We have grid charges in Germany, which are quite high and which are different depending on the region. So that may distort our results. So what we did is we always looked at the biomethane tariff and at the comparable natural gas tariff from the same provider in the same region in order to exclude this potential bias. So we always compared natural gas tariff and biomethane tariff from the same provider. And we tested our hypothesis on two levels. First, on a country-by-country basis, and then we threw all the data into one model and looked and try to find out if there's anything different on that level. So let's first look at the country-by-country level. What you see here is the product design, the biomethane content by tariffs and countries. And if we look at Germany, we find that nearly 75% of all tariffs are contain 10% biomethane. In Austria, it's pretty mixed, as you see, and the range is from 0.01% tariffs, so next to nothing, to 100% biomethane tariffs. Switzerland also well mixed, and in the UK there is a strong focus again on 10% tariffs. For Germany, we can easily explain the dominance of the 10% tariffs because that has to do with the Renewable Heat Act, which allows households to fulfill the stipulations of the Renewable Heat Act via biomethane if they have at least 10% of biomethane in the gas product they source. For the UK, we're not quite sure what the reason is. We looked at the link between biomethane content and the price difference between the natural gas product and the biomethane product, and we found a rather strong link, or medium to strong link, in Germany, in Austria and Switzerland. In the United Kingdom, we have a number of biomethane tariffs, but we only had very few cases in which we could compare those biomethane tariffs directly to a natural gas tariff, so UK was excluded from the analysis. But what we see here, if, for instance, this 10% range, we see that there's a considerable range of price markups for biomethane, even if the content, biomethane content is absolutely the same. You would not really expect that from a well-developed and mature market. Next thing is we looked at the origin by tariffs, so the geographical origin, and we found that for many German tariffs, the origin is just not disclosed. And for Switzerland, it was pretty balanced between regional, national, international tariffs, and in Austria, we only have regional tariffs. Now, we checked if there's any effect on the price, and there was no significant difference neither for Germany nor for Switzerland. Well, in Germany, the number of cases where the origin was disclosed was very low, just 15. Switzerland, we drew on 141 cases, but still no significant difference. Now let's look at the feedstock. So again, the German providers were rather secretive. For 70% of the gas tariffs, they did not disclose the feedstock. Austrian providers were more transparent, and Swiss providers even more. What we see is that in Germany, we have tariffs that are purely based on waste, and some that are based on a mix of waste and energy crops, and some that are purely based on energy crops. Whereas in Austria, the waste-based tariffs are dominant, and even more so in Switzerland. Again, well, since we know that consumers like waste as a resource for biogas, and they don't like energy crops, we would assume to see a difference between those products. And this is only the case for Germany. For Germany, we saw a significant difference between the two products, so based on waste or based on energy crops, or a mix of those. For Austria and Switzerland, we didn't see any significant difference. So that might be the case because the debate, the critical discourse on energy crops is there, or has been very fierce in Germany, and maybe this is why providers have reacted in this way. Now we threw, in the second step, all data into one model, and to make a long story short, we, even with a stepwise regression, we only found the share of biomethane to be of influence on the price. So again, we will look at the dependent variable as the price difference, and the independent variables are all the attributes that we just went through. And the only thing that really counted, the only thing that SPSS included in the end was the biomethane content. But it's a very strong predictor of the price difference. So that hints to markup pricing, because of course the biomethane content is a strong cost driver. The more biomethane you have in the tariff, the more costly it is. So basically, if you double the biomethane content, you double the price. Let's look at this in total. So there are clear differences in product design between the countries. Biomethane content in Germany and the UK markets, we see a lot of 10% tariffs. In Switzerland and Austria, it's more evenly distributed. As I said, in Germany, that's driven by legal provisions. Reason for the UK is still unclear. For the geographical origin, the German providers are not very transparent. They do not disclose the geographical origin in many cases. Austria has only regional tariffs, and the Swiss market again shows an even distribution. The problem for the providers in Germany often is that they source biomethane from the market, so they don't have an integrated value chain, and they source this biomethane partly very short term, so they do not know the origin of the biomethane beforehand. So that could be a reason. In Austria, we had to dig a little deeper into the legal provisions, and we found that biomethane plants receive a refund on the gas grid charges if their gas is used by a customer in the same region, and that probably drives the dominance of regional products. Austrian and Swiss markets clearly dominate by waste-based tariffs. Germany goes a bit of a special way, this heavy reliance on energy crops that seems to be a peculiarity of the German market, and German providers do not often disclose the feedstock. So hypothesis one is supported for the model with all countries, as well as for single countries. In the UK, there are too few data. So that is in line with consumer preferences, and it is also cost driven. So that would be consistent with markup pricing. For hypothesis 2 and 3, these are not supported for any of the countries, or for the overall model, and the feedstock is only hypothesis only supported for Germany and not supported for Austria and Switzerland, and not for the all country model. So in Germany, we did this analysis already 5 years ago, and then we did not see a difference we could not confirm this feedstock hypothesis. So it seems that the German providers have changed their pricing strategy. They seem to be more aware of the consumer preference for waste and the potential that lies within this preference for an elevated price. And this is interesting because usually you get the waste-based gas for a lower price per kilowatt hour if you're a trader. So the purchasing costs are lower, but you can charge a higher price to the consumer. And that the price is lower because waste-based gas is not as strongly subsidized in the CHP usage. But this may change if more gas goes into the transportation sector. Well, if we turn towards the providers, we would say, well, the disclosure of biomethane product attributes is still insufficient in Germany. Providers should try and be more transparent. Providers could increase trust by being more transparent, and they could possibly, if we look at this from a provider's perspective, skim higher willingness to pay if they disclose pro-environmental attributes. Also, German and Swiss providers could try to exploit the possibly higher willingness to pay for local and regional gas products. And the same is true for Austrian providers. So if we look at this market and compare it to other markets, it seems that it's still rather immature. Large price differences between providers, although you can, as a consumer, choose from a wide range of suppliers wherever you live, and pricing that is out of step with consumer preferences. A short outlook. Well, I think biomethane will go more into transportation than into heating in the next years based on the legislation that we're seeing at the moment. This is one trend. Another trend is that we will see more renewable gas products from power to gas. So power to gas is picking up. And the question is, will power to gas be an ally or a competitor for biomethane? Because there are concepts where you combine power to gas and biomethane plants, and we're working on a research project on this at the moment. But it can also replace biomethane in the market, and we are running a choice experiment just this week. I'm not sure, Benedikt, if the results have come in yet, and we are curious to see what consumers prefer and how high their willingness to pay for power to gas products and biomethane products are. We're always happy to cooperate with researchers from other countries, do comparative studies. That's always more interesting than just covering your own country, I think. And we've just published one paper based on the data set that we also used for today's presentation. There we do not look at the pricing strategy, but we look at the policy frameworks and the product strategies. So that's been published in Energy Policy a couple of weeks ago. Okay, thank you very much. That was it from my side.
Great, thank you, Carsten. Anybody want to ask a question or make a comment on what Carsten's just said? Carsten, can I start with one question for you? What do you mean by power to gas? What are you talking about?
Oh yeah, electrolysis. So the using the excess electricity production, for instance, from wind power plants in an electrolyzer, I think that's called in English. So electrolysis process to produce hydrogen, and then put that hydrogen into a methanation process to produce renewable methane. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks. All right. Let me. I mean, you know, it was very interesting to look at those tariffs. I mean, yeah. Why would anybody be marketing a green gas tariff which had a lower percentage than the average percentage of green gas in the network? Because you said, well, we just said, didn't we, that, well, it's probably 2% is the biomethane content of the gas network in Germany. So you know, anybody who's marketing one at 1% is conning people. So, you know, I mean, that's ridiculous. That's less than the average. So isn't there any regulation of this? Because I know in the UK you have to, you know, you can't sell a product which has got less than the average renewable content and call it a green product.
Well, yes, there is an average of average percentage of biomethane in the gas network, but that's just because someone is sourcing this biomethane, so it doesn't come from nowhere. So if you want, as a consumer, if you want to make a difference, if you want to increase the share of biomethane, then you have to buy this biomethane tariff. And even if the percentage of your tariff is lower than the average at the moment, every consumer counts, and every consumer can contribute to increasing the share, because there are, of course, millions of households that do not source any biomethane at all. And
but is that true? I mean, you know, sorry, that's not true in renewable electricity, is it? You know, there's an overall incentive framework for renewable electricity, which is the reason why renewable electricity is 40% in Germany. Okay, it's nothing to do with consumer tariffs. All that consumer tariffs do is allocate that renewables to particular consumers. They're not responsible for financing it. So, you know, there's some marginal additional, very marginal additional amount of money going to renewables. So it's not true to say that in gas, is it? I mean, I can't believe it is. So
no, I think in electricity it's even worse. Well, consumers in Germany source because they have, I mean, there has to be some renewable electricity production somewhere in order to justify a green tariff. They source it from Norway or Sweden or Austria, and the share of renewables that we see in the German electricity production is mainly based on the subsidies from the Renewable Energy Act, and not so much on households. And that is not quite the same in the biomethane market. And it's also different because you can source a green electricity product at virtually no markup in Germany, which is also not true for the gas market, because the provider incurs substantial additional costs if they replace natural gas by biomethane. And if households order more biomethane, that produces demand that inspires production, not in that very minute, but in the midterm, and that increases the share of biomethane in the gas network. So there is, you could argue, an effect of consumer demand in the development of biomethane. But we have to concede it's a niche. Yeah? It's a niche. Most of the biomethane goes into CHP, which is incentivized through the Renewable Energy Act. But that will change. With the subsidies being cut severely, this population of CHP plants will die over the next years. There's even a famous mortality curve for the CHP plants in Germany, which shows that if we do not find a replacement for those CHPs, biogas plants will have a severe problem. So yeah. So there is an effect of consumer demand, although it's rather small.
Okay. No, well, that, you know, thank you. That's and I suppose the other question related to that is, so do we know how many people are on these tariffs? I mean, because you talked about, I know you can't necessarily observe that in your data, but do you know what the aggregate figures are?
No, there's no data. There's no data on this, unlike for electricity. But it's not, I don't think it's in the millions. It's rather in the hundreds, thousands. And providers are having a hard time in selling these products because, you know, we've spot consumers. We have taught them you can have a green electricity product at no premium
Okay.
And now we're telling them, yes, please buy this renewable gas product, but if you want 100%, you have to pay double the price. And that is something consumers don't understand. I think providers have made a serious mistake in the green electricity market. They've spoiled the market, they've destroyed the willingness to pay. And now in the methane market, they're paying the price for that.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to comment? Anica, have you got any questions you want to ask?
Yeah, I've got a question, and I was wondering, how do you see the heat market in the future? As we can see, like the share now is really small, and we have to increase the share of renewable energy in this field. And I don't really think biomethane will take like 100% of the gas in this field. No. Like, how do you see the future?
Okay. Yes. Although many people in the industry won't like it, I see biomethane as a transition technology, to be honest. In the short term, the biomethane market will, in my view, turn away from CHP units, electricity production, towards mobility, mobility in general. In the mid to long term, I think it will turn to heavy duty trucks, which are difficult to change to electricity, and maybe to aircraft. But I don't, frankly speaking, I don't see a role for biogas in 20 years in electricity production, and I don't see a role in many other sectors, except maybe for heavy duty mobility. And in the meantime, there is, I think, a role in the private heating sector, because as I said, the renovation cycles are so slow. We won't move to heat pumps in 3 or 5 years. This will probably take another 20 years. And until then, biomethane can have a positive role there. But I know after those 20 years, I'm not sure what role there will be. And we have to see that there's competition about the carbon, because the chemical industry also needs to think about where to source their carbon from in the future, and it will not be crude oil. So there could be a positive role in the chemical industry. The question just is, do we have to take the route from biomass to biogas to biomethane in order to produce bioplastics, or are there more efficient paths for that? So I'm afraid at least from my personal perspective, the outlook in the mid to long term for biogas are not very promising, but until then, I think there's a role to be played for biomethane in various sectors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question? Let's see, we've got Yasmin or Iwan or Esti. Do you want to ask a question? Well, Carsten, let me ask you one about, is there anything to learn about from the United States on any of these things? I mean, I don't know, is there any biomethane in the US, and do they have any green tariffs?
No, we didn't look at that, but the biomethane market in the US is not very developed, and we have to concede that in Germany it is only so developed because of the general subsidies that we have. Maybe there's something to be learned from Sweden, which uses biomethane a lot in the mobility sector. I think they made a good move there. And I'm curious to see how France will evolve, because they have very ambitious targets, but the average size of their plants is rather small. I've been at a conference where people were even discussing putting that methane into these pressure bottles or something and transporting the gas not via pipeline. And I'm getting a headache thinking of the cost of that. But there are various routes that are being explored in France. I think that would be a very interesting market to look at. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? I suppose I think you did mention, I mean, okay, imagine you've unlimited resources. you know, the obvious way to do this is a discrete choice experiment where you just ask consumers what their willingness to pay is. I think you did say you were going to do that, because that is the obvious thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and nobody's done it yet. There's the only qualitative study that we have is from Forza from 2013, and that's based on interviews. And we're doing this just this week. So probably in 1 or 2 days, we will have the results. And Benedikt and I are already pretty excited to see what comes out. And we are testing the effect in this choice experiment of various attributes, eco-labels, and also the content, and whether it's power to gas or biomethane, and regionality. And with regard to labels, we've even created
your own label.
And see how that goes, because well, we assume that consumers do not really know a lot about labels, and as long as there is any label, they will like it. So let's see how that goes.
And so, is this Germany, or is it German?
This is Germany, and this is why I said we are very happy to cooperate, because we could roll this out to other countries. But since the study is funded by the German Ministry of Economics and Energy, they only fund national studies. But maybe if you're interested and you have some funds from the UK, the choice experiment is there. We just need to adapt it.
No, it's very interesting. Yeah, worth doing, I think.
Absolutely. Because I think also that this strong aversion against energy crops is something that's a very German thing, and probably not as pronounced in the UK or other countries.
Yeah. Well, as we know, there are lots of very local things going on in energy, which are not consistent with net zero. And, you know, various national environmental movements need to wise up if they want net zero. They can't be opposed to things which are critical to delivering net zero.
Absolutely.
Very good. Anything else? I think if there isn't, we should take the opportunity to finish a bit early, given that our third speaker hasn't shown up. And I will thank both of our speakers for excellent presentations, and thank you for opening up this subject of green gas, which I only know a little bit about, but now I know a lot more. So thank you very much for that. And you know, all the best on getting your stuff published, and hopefully come back in a year's time and present some future results in this area. So thank you to everyone for coming this morning, and for a very good session. Have a good day.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
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 Thank you very much, Michael, for all the animation. And if it's okay for you, are we in the session? Is that good?
Yeah, thank you, Felix. Thanks for organizing all the tech. I think you can switch the recording off now.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for being there this morning. It was good. The people who came, it was good.
Yeah. The things were very rich.
Yeah. All right. I'll say goodbye now. And thank you.